All right. Logan and Grant, thanks so much for joining me. For those who don't know them, these are the co-founders of Whatnot. You probably already know Whatnot, but if you don't, it's the fastest growing marketplace in the US, and it's been that way now for 3 years. So it's not just growing fast, it's also growing big. I've heard Logan describe it as Twitch meets eBay. And Scribble Ventures first invested in Whatnot in the seed back in 2020, which was an interesting time in the world, and also right about when Whatnot started taking off. And one of the things I love about Whatnot is for years when I was leading product at Twitter and Instagram, we talk about social commerce, we talk about live commerce. It's huge all over Asia. I think in China alone, live stream shopping is like a $600 billion industry and growing. But everything we tried at Twitter and Instagram failed. And I think pretty much everything every other big company tried failed. It's just never taken off in the US until you guys and until Whatnot. So maybe we start by you guys just giving a quick background on the company and your story, and we'll go from there. Like, why did you start it? How did you manage to get the initial bits of product market fit and then, begin scaling up?
Sure. So I'll kick it off. I'm Grant, one of the co-founders with Logan over here. I think, the punchline that I'll give you is I think part of our success in live commerce was that we didn't have any intention on building something in live commerce. So when we started Whatnot, we actually started a collectibles marketplace because both Logan and I had been big collectors, and we just thought the experiences out there weren't that great. And, around 2020, around when we were starting the business, that's when COVID took over the world. And there were a lot more people getting back into their hobbies and collecting things. And we just thought there was something around the social aspect of collecting, because a lot of the marketplaces that people, buy on are very transactional. You go there, you search, but a lot of collectibles is about the community more so than the object. The object's oftentimes just an excuse to talk to someone who has a similar interest as you. And so we just felt like there was something around that. And so we started Whatnot as a collectibles marketplace just focused on Funko Pops, which you may not know what that is, but if you saw one, you would know. It's like a little vinyl doll with a big head. And we just started building a product really rapidly and staying close to community. And we kind of stumbled onto live as a function of that.
Really how we stumbled onto live was, we grew a significant user base, specifically in the Funko community, which was great. But what we saw, because we always watched what our users were doing and talking to our users, was they're actually hacking Instagram as a way to host these sort of auction style formats. But the experience was really bad, but people loved it because there would be a 10-second latency between me and you. People would place bids or comments. And then you'd go back and forth through Instagram DM to sort of collect payment information, shipping information. And so you talked about China and like what was happening there. Grant and I had no idea what was happening there. But we built that because, one, our users are already doing this off platform, and we thought that would be a great user experience. But the Chinese part was very surprising to us. So
Yeah. And at what point in there were you like, holy cow, this is actually starting to be a thing? Like, we might have something.
I think it was the first stream we did. I don't know if you would say that, Grant, but
I think the journey of figuring out you're on to something good it's like a process. It's like everyone talks about, oh, you have product market fit. You don't really know you have product market fit until like way after you have product market fit, because there's a zillion things that can go wrong. But I think like after the first stream, during the first stream, it was like Logan and me sitting next to each other. I was the one streaming and he was helping with like the tech. It was very MVP. So you're like entering products in via command line. And, I sold like $5,000 worth of Funko Pops in a couple hours. Wow. And we just got off that and we're just like, we don't know what this is, but we just sold a lot of stuff and it seems like people really like it. So we've got the whole team together the next day and we're like, everything else you're doing, drop it. We're going into live. And we still didn't know anything about live shopping in China. I'll give you a fun fact. We didn't know anything about live shopping in China until we started the fundraise for the seed round. And one of the first few investors I talked with was like, oh, you must know a lot about live shopping in China. And I was like, uh-huh. And then I just went, and so I went and I researched it afterwards, and I was like, wow, this is huge. with what we're seeing coupled with how big the market is in China, maybe this thing can be monstrous. And then probably the pitch, we pitched you with by that point was live shopping in China because it's a good pitch.
Yeah, right.
But we had no idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's so many, dead bodies, if you will. Like so many people have tried and failed. And so what's the dynamic between the two of you as you're growing? Like, is one of you more optimistic and one of you more pessimistic? Like one of you saying, we got this, and the other one's like, no, this is broken and that's like, are you guys usually in the same place? What's the founder dynamic?
What do you think, Logan? You go.
I would say, I think it depends. I mean, Grant's and everyone's shit all the time, and I think that's a good thing. And so it's not just in my shit, but it's also like the whole team stuff, and that's just more the way he likes to operate. I would say I'm a little bit more optimistic, specifically in terms of building product and kind of letting the team sort of make mistakes and not sort of going in before they make that mistake, if that makes sense. But I think the dynamic between him and I, it's really good. So we've actually never worked at a company together. This is the first company we've worked at together. We've worked on projects in the past, and that was kind of the start of our relationship and why we've always wanted to sort of work and leave our jobs and start whatnot. But I think like getting to know Grant, we've kind of figured out his style, and he's probably figured out my style, and it's been kind of, I would say the beginning days, it was a little bit more contentious, and today it's like, it's a little bit easier to work. So when things were on fire, things were on much more fire a couple of years ago than it is now. And I think we've been really incredibly lucky, specifically because we've hired a good team. But
yeah, I like that. The scale of how on fire things are, not on fire. It's how on fire.
And we were talking about product market fit, but I think, there's a lot of definitions of product market fit, but I think the new definition that I think the product market fit is like literally when shit is on fire and you can't fix everything.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I thought we had product market fit before, but I don't think that was product market fit. So
yeah, good problems to have. And you were talking about like starting small, and one thing that I've come to believe watching lots of startups, which I think is maybe not obvious. We all look at the giant companies around us, right? It's Google and Meta and Airbnb and everybody, and they serve global audiences with like these very broad products. Sometimes they have multiple products serving billions of users. And sometimes it's easy to think like, oh, I should go find a product that I can build for billions of people. But it's actually usually not the right way to begin, right? It's way better to have a smaller number of people that love you and can't imagine, what life would be like without you, than having 100 times that many people who are kind of like, it's pretty good. So, and like the way you guys grew Whatnot, I think embodies that. So maybe say a bit more about how you approached this sort of starting small and scaling out from there.
I'll kick this off, and Logan, if you want to jump in. So when you're a startup, you're hugely resource constrained. So our early team was like 4 people. And, either you're trying to do one of 2 things. You're trying to either upset a huge incumbent who has billions and billions of dollars worth of resource, or you're trying to create a wholly new market. But you're doing it with as small amount of resource as you can imagine. And so, and when no one's heard of you, no one trusts you, and you largely have no money like we did in the early days, it's very hard to convince a large number of people to come use your service. And so the best thing you can do is make something great for a small number of people because you're so heavily resource constrained. And if we tried to make a product for 1 billion people, there's no way it would be any good. Google or Facebook have tens of thousands of engineers perfecting the service and building it for that many people. But what they can't do is they can't go, hey, we're going to build a really great product for Funko Pop collectors. It's inherently impossible in the structures of those organizations, largely, because you're like, I have to move all of these big metrics, and I have to pay attention to Wall Street and do all of these things. And so I can't think of any counter examples, certainly not in consumer tech, which is what I know best. You have to start kind of very narrowly. There's a couple moments in time where you might be able to get away with it. It's probably like some platform level shifts, but it's so incredibly rare. Now, you do, that doesn't excuse, like there ends up being great tension in the early days because investors will only invest in a company that's going to be in $1 billion market. But the right way to actually build a good consumer product is to keep it really narrow. And so it's really tough. And there's actually a lot of people who pull you in a different direction, but I would never start another company not focused on a really narrow audience in consumer tech. Now, you have to start with that really narrow audience and you have to have a path to get it bigger if you're going to be venture funded. And so you have to be thoughtful around that. You have to be thinking about it in the early days, but you can't get to step 2 before you start at step 1, which is building something great for someone. And the only way to do that with a small amount of resources is to start it really small.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a compartmentalization almost in your head where you've got to know where you're going, but also be able to say, no, we're just right here right now, and we're going to make this awesome. Like, and talking about scale, like the early days are a lot of doing things that don't scale. And every startup has these kinds of incredible stories of the things that they did. I know we have crazy stories from Twitter of the things that we did that definitely did not scale. What did you guys do that didn't scale in the early days, but that was like a real catalyst?
I would say maybe it was kind of the original model that we had, which was we did physical authentication. And so in the early days, it was just Grant and I in a house together. And what I mean by physical authentication, someone would buy a Funko Pop online and the seller would actually ship it to us and we would physically authenticate it, then ship it to the buyer. Between 2 of us, that was a very constrained thing to do because we would have hundreds of boxes and we'd have to kind of go through that to really sort of, ensure the authenticity of things. To us, going through that process, it was not a scalable model, specifically on the operations side. And I think we learned that because it was so intensive on our side. And we needed to sort of figure out a better system, specifically on the seller side, and how do we vet sellers versus having everything go through us. And I would say that's one of the things. I don't know if Grant, you have other examples, but there's probably countless examples.
Yeah, I mean, there was tons of stuff we did.
We were doing customer support,
Well, we bootstrapped both sides in the marketplace. So like initially how we got it off the ground was we basically built a pricing algorithm, crawled all of the pricing data for Funko Pops, would price it based on liquidity and sell through over the past handful of days, go acquire it from eBay, authenticate it ourselves, ship it out. For the first 3 months in the marketplace, there was no seller product. And then when Logan built the seller product, we're like, we don't know if we have enough sell through to support sellers. So we then cross-listed everything to eBay under our Whatnot account, no matter which seller you were. And then we had to deal with all sorts of crazy stuff like, a seller didn't ship and we couldn't destroy our eBay ratings. So we're just like handing out refunds and free stuff to everyone to maintain liquidity. And we were losing, at the time, it's like thousands of dollars, which we didn't have that much money. So it felt like a lot of money. So entirely, the initial origins entirely unscalable.
That's awesome. How did you become Funko Pop experts to the point that you could do the authentication yourself?
Grant was the Funko Pop authenticator. I was not. So
look, so I think if you're gonna build anything great, you have to be immersed fully in the thing. You have to understand the users, you have to understand all parts of the business. It's just like learning anything else. You go incredibly deep. You research authentication is fundamentally like a research-based task, where it's like, okay, what does all the real stuff look like? What does all the fake stuff look like? What are the signals? How do we know? And then how do we codify, build systems, and scale it? And so it's very similar to the process of how do we understand what our user needs are? You just go talk to lots of people, you learn, you read everything out there. And I think that's how you build great product. Even for us to this day, the team's over 400 people. Whenever there's like a problem somewhere, we're just like, go talk to the users, go understand what they're doing, go look at the data, like deeply understand the problem, the space, and what everyone's doing in it.
And in it, going back to like starting small, now you guys you're no longer 4 people, you're 400 people, but you still want to be innovative. Like, how do you manage the starting small problem these days when you have more zeros associated with everything that you do?
So I think it just depends on the problem. So the the way we operated in the early days was, we said, whatever you create, we're doing like B plus work at lightning speed. So we would never do anything perfect, but we would get it. It would be good, and we'd get it out there, and we'd learn really fast. Now, as the business gets bigger, there's tens of thousands of sellers, millions of users on Whatnot, and so there's a lot of people using the system. You can't really tolerate things that don't work or funkiness in it. And so I think how we kind of think about it is, there's our core product experience, and then there's like new things that we're building and tacking on, or new categories. And there's low tolerance for low quality work in the core, and there's high tolerance for really fast, iterative, let's learn work. And there's no like hard gradient between those. But I think that's how we manage it. Is as a great technology company, you have to have a plus core consumer experience, but you also have to keep innovating. And there's a lot of tension between the two, but you kind of separate it out. So a good example would be, I think the market, like we have like our live product, and then we have our asynchronous product. Our live product's much more built out. That's kind of the core experience. Our asynchronous product, more eBay-like, we'll say, but there's some things we're doing in there that we think are going to differentiate us a lot. Much more tolerance for building fast and things that aren't perfect, and taking some swings. It's not a huge component of the business. It's meaningful, but it wouldn't take us down. So we just move really fast and innovate. As you get into the core experience, the bar just gets higher. Of course, you keep pushing. You can't be risk averse. And the beauty of software is a system that has high tolerance for risk. You can feature flag everything. You can A/B test stuff, roll it back, etc. So I think, summarizing, I think we're still really high risk taking. You elevate the bar through time, and then if you're building new things, treat it like a true 0 to 1 thing. Don't treat it like I'm trying to perfect the system.
Yeah.
I would say that at this stage, when we build 0 to 1 things versus, I would say, 3 years or 2 years ago, like, we're a little bit more cautious on how we build this, because our system is so big. And so anything that we do build, even if it is a 0 to 1 thing, like specifically Grant's example around the async marketplace, that is a dependency of a lot of things that live core experience depends on. And so we have to be a little bit more rigorous and grown up, specifically on our engineering culture. And like, that's definitely been a cultural shift, because we're used to, let's just say 2 years ago, shipping things and not really caring when it breaks. Well, we would care, but we would fix it immediately. But now it's like, if we break something, someone's business is at stake. And like, so many people's lives depend on Whatnot right now, because as a way of income. And so like, we just can't disrupt that.
Yeah. You said in the middle of your response there, B plus products at lightning speed, which starts to sound like a value. And I think company values are fascinating and so important when done right. One of the things Mark always said at Facebook that stuck with me was that a good value is one that another sensible company could take the exact opposite stance on and be reasonable, which makes something like, we're going to have high integrity, a terrible value, because nobody's going to take the opposite side of that. It's table stakes. But risking getting canceled myself, I think Facebook's move fast and break things is one of the greatest all-time values, because it is controversial, and you can imagine 100 companies that would say, no way, move methodically and do it right, or something like that. But move fast and break things gave engineers at Facebook permission to take risks. It built a culture of like rapid iteration. And I think that was one of the things at the heart of Facebook's success. So how do you guys think about culture as you go through hypergrowth? What are the values that define Whatnot?
So I can talk a little bit about this. I think like culture is one of the most important things. Specifically, we want to hire people who are culturally aligned with how we want to build product and how we want to operate. And so we actually, probably about a couple of years ago, built a set of cultural values, which I can name a few in a sec, but I think like culture is meant to change specifically as you scale. And so some of those values we've actually changed a little bit. One of the values that I would say is kind of similar to what the move fast and break things is. We have a move uncomfortably fast. And I think that value is really interesting because, what I've learned is people do take that to heart. And so they will move fast and they will break things, but they use moving fast as an excuse for breaking things. And I think it's like, depending on what it is, it could be sort of unacceptable, because I think we're kind of at this point of stage where you really have to think about quality to some degree. And like Grant said, the B+ work, and you're not going to bring the entire site down and use move uncomfortably fast as an excuse. Some of the things we really care about is like people can come in, as this is in a unique environment. I think principally we always want to operate with this sort of startup mentality, really being close to our users. But I think are a few principles outside of move uncomfortably fast that I think is really important is always listen to our users. I mean, that's traditionally probably the most important thing at the company. And I think we're pretty unique on how we do that, because we make everyone talk to users, not just product managers, engineers, designers, people on go-to-market, our ops team. We give everyone a dog fooding budget, so they have to use our app and understand our app. So every month employees have a certain amount of money to spend on whatnot. And I think it's just great for people to use the product and really understand it. Because we don't want to hire people who want to come in just because it's whatnot. We want people to like actually be excited about what we're building and understand our product. Another thing that I think is a really important principle is figure it out. We're kind of at this stage where we don't have a lot of things figured out, and we can't handhold you to figure things out. And so it's kind of like rolling up your sleeves and actually going outside of your comfort zone. And it might be not your expertise, and that's okay. But you should do your best job to figure it out and come with like the right solution to the problem. And I don't know if there's anything else, Grant, you want to add to that.
Nothing I'd add. I think culture is incredibly important because it's the shared language on which you agree to operate, and it's relatively unnatural for 400 people to operate in unison together. So if you don't have it, you can't really speak one language and make like this decisions. Things come to a standstill. So we officially have 11 principles at Whatnot. So we want more answers. So we have 11. We went pretty deep, and we define them in kind of like great detail. What does this mean? What are the trade-offs and why?
Yeah. Awesome. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's say I'm a PM at Whatnot. What's my life like? Like, I have an idea. How do I get it? Do I come to you and like pitch you things and you guys green light and I go? Is it totally the opposite side of the spectrum where like you've already laid out a roadmap and my job is to execute it and keep the trains running on time? Like something in between? How do you guys think about it?
I would say here we're kind of a mix of tops down and bottoms up. And so, obviously from like the company side, we have a strategy and we want to be able to execute on a couple of big bets. But I would say like, we go through trimester OKR planning, and it does seem like from what the team comes up with to sort of like kind of a bigger initiatives that the company wants, it's a blend of both, maybe split between like 60% what the team thinks is appropriate specifically to match some company-wide OKR and what they think is going to be best for our users, to something that we were really bullish on. Specifically, like we were talking about the asynchronous marketplace. That's something like Grant and I have been bullish on forever. And it's something that I'm actually been closely working with the team on, just because I think it's such an important thing. And so I would say it's both, but like you also asked, what's the life of being a PM here? I would say it's pretty rigorous. There's a lot to do, and it's like, how do you really prioritize your time and ruthlessly prioritize your time and really work on the best things that are going to be the most impactful things for our users and business. And I think given that we're kind of this startup where we have multiple fires, you got to like pick and choose which ones to put out and which ones to let burn. It's a really hard skill set to do. And so, we're pretty rigorous on the types of PMs we hire. And I think we've definitely gotten better. We actually only have probably about 4 or 5 PMs on the team. We need another 3 or 4 at least. And so it's been, challenging hiring, not just because not in terms of top of funnel, but really getting the right talent. I think Grant and I, we have a really high bar. And so, 1 out of 400 people who interview, not to scare anyone who's listening to this, will probably not make it through the process.
Nice. It's a good position to be in, right? So maybe on data for a second. Marketplaces throw off a ton of data, and you're managing supply and demand. You have large and growing numbers, so you can be very data driven, and you've got backgrounds at places like Meta that live off of a super data driven approach. But I know you guys have strong feelings about this. How do you think about how you use data at Whatnot?
So I would say probably from day zero, we've always been very data oriented. Though, data and all of the surrounding things, they're tools to be used during the right situation. And so you have to be kind of like quite thoughtful around that. So, I'd say the controversial thing for us has always been really up until about 3 months ago, we didn't A/B test a thing. And, you're talking, as a business, we're big enough to be a public business. So, the numbers are and they were 3 months ago as well. We're big enough that, almost anyone would do it. And, the reason for that is we were building an incredible number of foundational pieces to the business. And it was just very clear they were going to be additive to the user experience. And when it's like really clear, this is like solves a clear problem, it's designed well, the team, we dog fooded it and built it well, just get it into users' hands as fast as possible. Like we are moving uncomfortably fast. On occasion we might get it wrong. We did some feature flags, you roll it back. So I think that would be like the most controversial thing. At this, as you get bigger and bigger, you do need to, you always need to innovate, but you also need to optimize the core experience more. So like one of the core things that we're doing now is, Whatnot, most sales on Whatnot come through our feed. And so figuring out what to rank and what content to show people to drive sales for our sellers' businesses are really important. It's very hard to intuit like, hey, I put this thing above this thing or above this thing, and there's like millions of permutations of these things. Well, in that world, you do need to start to A/B test to actually deliver for the users. And so, in say discovery, we are moving more towards kind of data-driven A/B testing team, but we won't ever lose our roots and not trusting our guts on, hey, we think this is the right product decision. We think it's good for users. We're just going to ship the thing. I'd say I feel like you can't not be data-driven. We've always known the metrics, the business, the drivers very deeply. Knowing that, we chose very purposefully for the first 3.5 years of the business to A/B test virtually nothing because we had high conviction based on talking to users and looking at the data that we were making the right decisions. And I think, broadly the data is borne it out. As we get to this stage where some of those decisions, say in like discovery, you no matter how good you are, you can't really know because you're running so many different math equations and permutations. You do have to use the tool and use A/B testing to get to the right outcome. So I think, nuts and bolts is I think either end of the spectrum, there's some companies who are like, oh, we're only going to be design driven. There's some companies who are like, we're going to A/B test every damn thing. And, I think each one of those approaches has its place. And if you can, figuring out when to use that tool at the right time is really important. So I think that's what we've tried to do.
Also, I think we definitely are incredibly lucky because we strategically, when things were kind of blowing up, decided to invest in a data team and do that earlier than a lot of most people do. And I think a lot of people are impressed with how mature our data stack is, specifically for the stage of business and how long we've been operating. I think that was a really good strategic decision that we made, and I'm very happy we did because we're able to do a lot of the things that Grant's talking about.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that really resonated with me. One is just like a reminder that these things are tools. They serve you. You don't serve them. So use them where they're helpful and don't where they're unnecessary. And also, like, there are real trade-offs with it in terms of timing. Like, it takes time to design a whole bunch of A/B tests. And if you're building foundational pieces that you just know need to exist, sometimes it's better to just go build them as fast as you can and you can always optimize later. And that makes a lot of sense. So you start to get scale, and all sorts of good things happen with scale. Bad things happen too. One of those is that suddenly you become an interesting target for the bad guys, right? The people who are out to defraud and steal money, and it's building to like solve those problems is always hard because it goes against all your normal instincts as a PM, right? Like instead of reducing friction, you want to add friction in places. So and you want to like trust your customers, but actually you need to add points where you really make them prove that trust. So how have you guys balanced this as you've grown?
So one, both Logan and I had a bunch of experience in marketplaces. And one of the things that marketplaces live and die on is trust. And so, and it trades off against a good user experience in a lot of places, and it trades off against growth in a lot of places. But actually forever, since the beginning of Whatnot, trust has been a pillar of the strategy. And so we've always had a trust and safety team, and they've always been a core team. So like in our business, even today, we have 5 pillars we invest in. So we'll invest in those 5 pillars for the next like 3 years, probably would be my guess. And one of those is trust and safety, and it will basically never go away. So, we've, in comparison to like almost any other marketplace on the internet, we actually don't have an open supply side. So every seller on Whatnot's actually hand vetted by our team today. And we've done that all the way up into pretty big scale. Because if people don't feel comfortable, they're not going to come back and purchase. Now, all that said, when you're scaling incredibly fast and have millions of people and tens of thousands of sellers, it's effectively Whatnot's effectively like a large, a moderate sized internet city. And so you need a police force, and people do bad things. And so, we develop policies to try and steer the laws of the land. And, we've built a lot of systems, and we're not perfect. We definitely still make mistakes here. These are very hard. And a lot of the ways people manipulate this system is pretty unique to live commerce. The biggest trust and safety problem we've had, I never would have expected to be the biggest problems. They're quite ops team that reviews things. We have a whole engineering team. A lot of the go-to-market team spends a lot of time on it. And I think it's a hard problem that's ever ongoing, and we're going to invest in it forever. We've done we put out some pretty great product stuff in the past 3 to 4 months, but still a lot of work to do.
What about there's the parts of this that are obviously bad, people trying to defraud users, like it's an evolutionary game. You're never perfect. It's very difficult. They get clever, but like, it's pretty clear what you do when you catch them. How do you guys think about the stuff that's not obviously illegal, but like controversial, issues of speech, things that are offensive? How strong of a hand do you guys want to take in terms of, Whatnot's policies versus how hands-off do you want to be?
Yeah, so our North Star is to make sure that our community trusts us. And so there's 2 sides to that. There's the buyer side, there's the seller side, and those things are often at odds with each other. And so we try to be really clear what our North Star is and set up a series of principles on each side of things. And now we as a platform, we consider ourselves we're a shopping platform. We're not like a free speech platform, for instance. We're not like Twitter. And so as a function of that, we're actually we will police speech much more if it's going to erode the businesses of our sellers or make people uncomfortable in shopping. So like one of the more common things where we end up banning people, for instance, is they'll talk bad about other sellers and sometimes they might bully them. If you can say honest things about businesses, but if you're bullying people, you're going to be gone. So that's an easy example. More controversial example, I'll give you an example of a thing that's been controversial on our platform is, we have all these sellers, and some of them have very, 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 very large operations. Our biggest sellers are doing million orders a year. And so you're talking, huge logistics operation. We had a moment a few months ago where a bunch of items had gone missing across a bunch of buyers, and they kind of cooperated on social media and were like, hey, this guy's scamming us. And there was a whole mob who wanted us to ban this person's business. And so in a case like that, we think fairness is important. So we don't instantly ban a business, but we go and investigate and understand the issues. Was there malicious intent there? Or was it just a mistake because the guy was scaling his business? And do we teach them a lesson, but also help them scale their business? So in that case, we had a group of people saying, hey, let's ban this person. We went and ran a deep investigation. We saw nothing malicious. We saw someone who probably got in over their heels on scaling the fulfillment of their business. And so we go, all right, well, you screwed up. So you're going to be gone for a period of time because you can't do that to customers. And when you come back, we're going to want to see these 20 things with your fulfillment. And if it happens again, you will, destroy trust too much. So I think that would be one of the more controversial things. I don't think there are right or wrong answers on a lot of these things. It's just like put our principled stance out there and kind of adhere to it.
Yeah.
It is hard.
Super hard. Go ahead.
As I say, it is hard because we are this community-driven platform, and so people do like to talk, and I think that's a good thing. And so anything that happens in our platform, it is something that we have to really look into and use our best judgment. And I think we'll grow and learn every day. But it's since we're a community-driven platform, a lot of people like to talk specifically on Twitter. It's an interesting dynamic, I think, compared to other platforms. So
yeah. The only thing I know for sure after working on problems like this for years is that anybody who says it's easy has not thought deeply about it. Wherever you define.
Trust and safety is one of
the hardest thing.
Yeah. And really important. So it's great that you guys are thinking about it and focusing on it. So maybe let's talk about people a little bit and scaling. And my own story here that I reflect on a lot is when I joined Twitter in 2009, my first boss was this guy, Abdur Chowdhury, who was the chief scientist. And I joined as the first data scientist, kind of data engineer. And he'd always say, well, now that you're here, you're going to lead everything with data. I've fired myself from that job. And I was always like, wait a minute, like you fired yourself from that? Isn't building a career about getting more responsibility, not finding people to give that responsibility away to? But as I've grown, I've learned he was totally right. The only way you scale, whether it's from like 4 to 400, like what you guys have done, or 400 to 4,000, is to find people who are better than you, and you fire yourself from the things that you were doing before. So I'm curious if that's been your experience or if you guys disagree with that. And like, what's the progression been like for you two as founders, going from, 4 people and doing everything to a big team of 400?
I agree and I disagree. I think it just depends on what it is. So I've scaled myself out of one job and I'm trying to scale myself out of another job. Finding better people, I think, is much more important. And versus kind of like me putting an ego and saying I can do the job. And so I think, like, for instance, an example would be Ludo, who's our VP of engineering. Grant and I probably spent almost a year on that search because we wanted to find a great person. I was running engineering and shit was on fire and like it was very chaotic. And me being someone with not as much experience with Ludo and managing much bigger teams, which I've never done in my past, it's like it was kind of like a wake-up call where we're like, we need to find someone who's not only great at managing people but also recruiting, can really think about kind of the things as we scale as a company that we're going to need within the engineering team. And so that was like a really good hire we made. And we're kind of at this point too on the product side. So I'm also running product, where, I haven't done the job before at this level. And I think like it's, even though I'll always be involved in the product to some degree, and I think it's like, I think that's the thing that I won't scale myself out of, and probably Grant too. And there's also other things. It's like, I think you still need to be involved to some degree. Which is kind of, I guess, the point where I would say I disagree, where you can't completely say you're not in the data science. You still have to understand and know what's going on, even within engineering. But I think this is a particular hire we're looking for right now. I think we've been like 9 months at the search, so it's also a very important hire. I think we'll probably fill it pretty soon. We've interviewed a lot of people, but I think it's what you got to do specifically as founders. You got to set yourself up for success and think about the company first. And yeah, but I do think you have to be involved in those things when you do hire those people and have an understanding and go deep with those things, because things can get out of control. Even if you might hire someone really good on paper, you have to know what's going on. And most people and most execs that we've heard from other founders, we've been really lucky hiring execs. Most people on paper aren't that good. So I think it's like you have to do your diligence with interviewing, but you also have to, like, as they're working here, still be very closely involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Grant, I'd love to hear your experiences.
I mean, I think the sentiment Logan and I share is very similar. So I think there's what you said is a truth, right? Which is, if you're going to go to 400 to 1,000 to 2,000, can't do the job the same way. You can't try and control all the pieces of it. You would die because there's so many things to do. You know, like 3 years ago, I was still doing every customer support ticket, basically. So obviously, do I do every customer support ticket now? You know, hell no. Now the flip of it that's also true is, if you know, I think at the end of the day, a company can only be great if you're delivering for your users and creating a great business around it. And if you completely cede control and understanding, there is no way that you can push the business towards solving user problems and making sure you're on the right tracks. And so, you know, I think you have to do both things, and that's why the job's really hard. It's like you have to seed the thing, but still understand the components of it well enough and what's happening to make quality decisions, because it's really easy for you to kind of get detached from that, and shit can go to hell. And you know, and it's like, and not only can it go to hell, it will. And so it's just a matter of where it's going to pop up next. And the sooner you catch it, the better the business is going to be as a function of that. So, you know, I think all these, one of the things I tell the team all the time is, like, most things are not, I'm going to do this or this or this. It's going, like, if you're going to do it well, you're going to do this and this and this and this. So I think it's like and functions, not ors.
Awesome. So I want to switch gears a little bit and maybe let's move to the current day and talk about kind of like reflections on where you are, where you go next. So one of the amazing things about Whatnot is how many things have gone right, but you've had a whole bunch of stuff that, I mean, you talk about shit being on fire all the time. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that goes wrong on a daily basis too. You failed. Like, talk about some of those things that haven't worked. What have you learned from the stuff that hasn't worked, and how does that influence what you build going forward?
You want me to go? So I'd say we've definitely made hiring mistakes. I think any co-founding team, CEO, executive will tell you you're going to make hiring mistakes. And the thing that people will also tell you is you always have to keep the bar incredibly high, but it's very amorphous on what that actually means and how to do that in like a proper way. So, you know, I think one of the things, you know, Logan mentioned, I think like we've had a pretty good hit rate in our executives. It's because like they go through a gauntlet. Like, you know, again, like we really don't hire people unless we have like incredible confidence in them. And, you know, I think that's been a good thing for us. I think one of the more recent things is, you know, we talked a lot about how we really didn't A/B test too much. I think we probably waited a little bit too long to kind of build that muscle. Because when you go from, hey, I'm going to use pure product intuition to, hey, I'm going to A/B test a bunch of things, you know, a lot of your systems got to change, particularly when you're an at-scale company and you're kind of like pushing teams in a different direction. And I think we're a little bit more in the mode of, let's build lots of new things as opposed to perfect the existing system, which is really important as you get bigger. And I think we're still calibrating our way towards that. And so there's probably some stuff that we built and shipped over the past 3 or 4 months that, you know, had we been a little bit more deliberate on like the core experience and getting it right, would have set the business ahead, you know, further.
Yeah. And so now you guys we talked about the the way that live and social commerce is exploding in Asia, or has exploded over the past decade. Now you guys are making it work in the US. Nobody else seems to be. Like, what would you say you know that others don't?
Sorry, I was on mute, and I can answer this. I think, we're incredibly lucky, first of all, but I would say, the reason why we've been able to make it work versus a lot of others, and I would say it's kind of, you can think about two sets of competitors. What people who are, early startups like ourselves, and the bigger companies such as like Meta, and so forth, which have kind of actively gone after live commerce. But for us, I think what we've done well is, one, really ruthlessly prioritize kind of like the right things to build, and building and being very, very close to our users, and developing a relationship with our users, not just people I'm buying, but also people who are selling, and really developing a good go-to-market strategy around how do we sort of think in launch categories. So as Grant mentioned, we launched with Funko Pops, and that was very, very that was a strategy, and a lot of investors were actually giving us pushback when we were out to fundraise, saying like, this isn't a big business, you need to get into other categories. Unless you can get into other categories, we're not going to invest. And I think like, that makes sense from an investable standpoint, but when you're building something, it doesn't make sense. You have to really start small and start building out. And I think how we've gone about category expansion has really worked for us, because we kind of look at one and kind of these overlapping categories. If I like Funko Pops, I might like Pokemon. And so, launching into Pokemon and Funko, coming from Funko was actually a little bit easier for us, just because we had that user base. And then you gotta have to take big bets and not give up on things. And so sports, which is our biggest category today, you can think about the user of sports. Most people probably don't collect Funko Pops or Pokemon. The type of user is a little bit different, but it really took us a lot of dedication to get that working. And it took probably about maybe, I don't know, Grant, maybe about 6 to 8 months to actually get off the ground. And I think a lot of companies would have just given up because they don't see it working immediately. And I think it takes a lot of effort to get something going, and you can't give up, and you have to sort of stay laser focused and not too much. If you look at some of our competitors beneath us, at the kind of startup level, you would see them go very horizontal versus very vertical. And I think you can't really build a good user experience because you can't really deeply understand each category and really interact with those users and grow those categories and make sure there's a great experience for those categories. Anything else to add, Grant?
I just think fundamentally we weren't building a live commerce business. And I think if you approach any business from the angle of, I'm going to build a business, you're not actually going to solve user problems. And so we just said we're going to build something great for collectors, and we went and built something great for collectors. So at the end of the day, you build your business as something great for people. It's not like anyone's asking you, hey, I really want like live commerce, just like copy paste that like thing from Asia over here. And so I think that's the big fundamental mistake. There's obviously a bunch of things that Logan alluded to. I think we did really well, which was like, look, we know how to execute well. We've been working on marketplaces for the past, the vast majority of both of our careers. We know how to do category expansion. We know how to set up support. We know how to build product. So I think the combination of like, you don't build a business, typically speaking, by copy and paste a business model. You build it by solving user problems. And then we knew how to actually go and execute and solve those problems.
Yeah, I love it. So one of the coolest things about scaled consumer products to me, like you're talking Whatnot or Instagram or Twitter or any of them, is people end up using your product for stuff that you just would have never imagined, right? Like in Twitter's case, you had people using it to organize free speech rallies during the Arab Spring. You had like a dude live tweeting the Bin Laden raid without realizing what he was doing. Presidential candidates using it to run their campaigns, all the crazy stuff that happens. You must have had a bunch of similar things on Whatnot. Like, what are some of your favorites?
Right.
One of my favorites is there's this fish and coral shop, and I think they're in like Ohio or something. And the guy sold like 5,000 corals through Whatnot, or maybe even more now at this point, like just corals and fish. And we're like, whoa, we were building a collectibles marketplace, and this guy's selling live corals. And it turns out you can actually send them through the mail, which corals and fish, you can actually send it to the mail if you package it properly, which I didn't anticipate. And we were talking to a product candidate the other day, and he was like, yeah, I woke up at like 5 a.m. and someone was on there selling homemade pickles or pickles from somewhere, and I bought a bunch of pickles. So to me, it's kind of like the range of businesses that are getting built on Whatnot is incredibly surprising.
Yeah, I mean, on top of that, in terms of some things that define our roadmap too, is how our product is intended to be used, because we don't have that feature. And so what we'll see is a lot of users will kind of hack things in a way where we didn't really realize that they could hack it. And an example would be people would create tips for themselves because they would create a listing and they would hack it because we had NFTs. And so NFTs, you don't have to pay for shipping. And so they would list it under the NFT category. And then they would get all that money would go to them, except, the commission that we made. And we're like, wow, a lot of people are doing this. We need to like build tipping as soon as possible. And so it's multiple things within our app that surprise me that people are able to sort of find workarounds. And, if you see people doing that, it's a good sort of case to say, hey, maybe this is something we should build within the product.
Yeah, I love that. Very similar to back in the days of Twitter when people like started basically manually typing RT at, and at some point we were like, we should probably just build this. And so as you look forward, 3 years in the future, what are you guys most excited about right now? When you wake up in the morning, what's the thing you're thinking about that like gets you really jazzed to come into work?
I would say for myself, maybe Grant, you can go after that. It's a couple things. One, how do we 3 years from now? And I think what will be a challenge and a lot of companies don't get right is like, how do we continue to scale culture and operate at the same level of efficiency and speed as we do today? And I think that's kind of more on the company side and people side. And two, around the product, I'm really excited about, there's so many categories that we can be in. And right now we're in over 100 categories. And how do we really scale that to thousands and thousands of categories? Not just within the US, but on an international basis. We launched in the UK probably about 6 months ago, in France a couple of months ago, and that's been growing very healthy. And so I think like our international expansion in parallel to our category expansion is really exciting to see. And like as Grant pointed out, these odd categories like coral, like have that as a category, and just like having these like fun things that people wouldn't expect to be streams that you can kind of go into, I think is really exciting to think about.
And then I guess I think Logan hit a lot of the things. I think category expansion is really fun. International is really fun. Logan also said earlier today, I'm the more pessimistic one, so I tend to wake up and think about what's going to go wrong. So there's a lot of fires to fight. But I'm just really excited for all the categories we can go into, all the businesses we can help build. And there's lots of fun new things. One of the things I've wanted to build in the product forever that I hope we build at some point next year is I'd love to build trivia. I'd love to see more game shows on Whatnot. We actually did a pilot game show a couple of weeks ago. Our marketing team put it together, and there's like tens of thousands of people tuned into it. It was incredibly fun, and so I don't know, that'll be a pet project I'd like to see come to life. Is I think a lot of what makes live shopping fun is it's not just shopping, it's a game, it's entertainment, and so building more of those mechanics into the product, I think just fun to build that stuff.
That's great. So we got just a couple minutes left. Let's do a quick lightning round. I'll just throw some questions at you and you guys can give like one-word answers. Texting or talking?
Texting.
Neither. Slacking.
Well, that's what I meant by texting. Slack. I hate meetings. So
all right. Would you rather have your superpower be invisibility or super strength?
Invisibility.
Super strength.
Most surprising thing about running a startup relative to your previous jobs?
The biggest problems are people problems.
I was gonna say the same thing, but I didn't know if I should say it on here.
I'm just being honest. Being honest.
I was gonna
didn't
say, yeah,
anticipate the level of people
Yeah,
problems.
Totally true. Totally true. Best TV show you've watched in the last 6 months?
Last of Us.
The Last of Us.
All right, you guys are synchronized. What would you say to someone who's never tried Whatnot?
Try it.
I mean, you know, when people say they don't try Whatnot, I try to explain it the best I can, but it's actually, I feel like it's really hard to explain, and it's best just to show. So I show them the app and I'm like, look what you can do, and then they try it. So
yeah. All right, last big question. Oppenheimer or Barbie?
Oppenheimer.
Barbie for me.
All
Barbie
right,
for
so
me,
there
yeah.
you're not synchronized. One of you is an Oppenheimer person and one of you is a Barbie person. We found the division at last. This has been awesome. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. It's really inspiring what you're doing, and I would encourage anybody who hasn't tried it to go give Whatnot a shot, because it is just an incredible experience.
Cool.
Thanks
Thanks,
for
Kevin.
having
Really
us on.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.